If you ask me what is the most pressing question we are facing today, my answer would be being uprooted. If you look at the United Nations statistics, you're going to see that more than 120 million people are being displaced for many reasons. Human rights abuses, displacement, environmental crisis, and the rest of it. 120 million people, that is the population of Japan, the 12th most populated country in the world. And the trend is looking that these numbers are going to be always increasing because of the different political and environmental crises. When we think about roots, we normally think about the metaphor of a tree being rooted in a particular soil. But what if being uprooted or being rooted not in a place or in a geography, rather in values? And what if being uprooted is to be uprooted in the way we are relating to the world? Now, I personally haven't felt rooted many times of my life. And today I want to share with you a story where I felt rooted in a place that I never visited before. And that was in 2005 when I visited southern Spain, Andalusia, or Al-Andalus, as we call it in Arabic. And there I was walking in the Jewish quarter of the city, the Juderia of Cordoba. And in Cordoba, I saw those beautiful, well-preserved houses, yet completely empty. The houses I felt like I was walking in a movie set. Here, and this is what struck me, that the Jewish quarter was without Jews. And then, during my tour, I went to the Grand Mosque of Cordoba, an architectural masterpiece, very famous for its double arcs and mosaics, that were brought by Muslim artists from Christian Damascus, emulating the architectural styles of the Grand Mosque of Damascus, that itself used to be a cathedral. Prior to that, it used to be a temple dedicated to Jupiter. In that sense, history is full of layers. But surprising me, in those places, I felt somewhat rooted. Their stories told me something. Yet in the same year, 2005, I visited Istanbul. And it was my dream then to visit the Cathedral of Hagia Sophia, that in itself was converted to a mosque in 1453 with the Ottoman conquest of the city. That conversion of Hagia Sophia happened around 39 years only before the conversion of the Cordoba Mosque to a church, 1492. I'm sure many of you recognize 1492. It was the year that the Muslims and Jews were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, the year that Columbus arrived to what the Europeans called the Americas, inaugurating centuries of displacement, dispossession, and annihilation of the indigenous populations of this land. In and throughout Turkey, I visited cities and neighborhoods and villages that used to be inhabited by Armenians. And they are completely empty because of the genocide of 1915. So somehow, in Istanbul and Cordoba, I felt rooted because that story of displacement is a universal story. The story of being uprooted is a universal story. It's a mechanism and behind the making of human history. Now, one of the most influential people on me, I'm going to share with you two of them today, is the German Jewish intellectual Walter Benjamin, who he himself died or took his own life on the Spanish-French border as he was escaping the Nazi occupation of France. And the Spanish border control officers wouldn't let him in to Spain because he had no exit visa from France. Knowing what would have happened to him if he would return to Nazi-occupied France, he took his own life. But on the eve of his death, he left us arguably what is the most important philosophical document of the 20th century. His thesis on the philosophy of history that has been very influential on me personally and others. In that, he says there is no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism. Civilization and barbarism make the same document. He didn't speak about two different documents. He spoke about one document made out of civilization and barbarism. And this is where Istanbul and Cordoba embody this truth. The beauty, the grandeur, the creativity, the innovation of these great places also embody invasion, displacement, dispossession, and erasure. They are both documents of civilization. At the same time, they are documents of barbarism. Now, when I was walking in the Jewish quarter that had no Jews, but it had the statue of the great Jewish rabbi Musa ibn Maymun, as we call him in Arabic, or Maimonides, as he's known in Euro-America. And this is my picture with him in 2005. Now, Musa ibn Maymun, his presence as a statue was extremely significant because he was probably the only Jewish person in the city of Cordoba. And then, at that moment, I had an epiphany. Now, what shall I mourn and what shall I celebrate? As an Arab Christian myself, do I celebrate the conversion of the Cordoba mosque into a church just because I'm a Christian? And as an Arab, do I mourn the mutilation of the Arabic script and Arabic motifs in the building of the Cordoba mosque by superimposing Christian motifs on it? And how about the Iberian Jews? Should I feel nothing just because I'm an Arab, and Arabs and Jews were made into enemies in the last 80 years in the context of European colonialism and European anti-Semitism? I mean, these are questions that all of us with hyphenated identities have to encounter and have to answer every single day. In Istanbul and Cordoba, I did not feel at home in a place or in ancestry or an identity that I belonged to. Rather, I felt at home in the recognition that I could see in the other the story of myself and see my own story in the stories of others. 1492 was an extremely important year for all of these different reasons. Now, my own biography, I was born in Egypt. My father is Syrian, my mother is Armenian, half Syrian. I was a Christian in a Muslim majority country. I was not Coptic when the majority of Egyptian Christians are Copts. I looked like a foreigner. None of my parents are originally from Egypt. When I went to Syria, I sounded like a foreigner. I spoke the Egyptian dialect of Arabic. And then it got complicated. When I moved to Canada, I was treated as an Arab. Arabic names are usually understood as Muslim names. So I left Egypt as a minoritized Christian to arrive to Canada as a racialized Muslim, bearing the same kind of racism and Islamophobia of my Muslim brothers and sisters. I never felt in place. Always with these hyphenated identities, we have to somehow legitimize and explain. Now, professionally, I'm an anthropologist. I work on history in a history department. I challenge identities. I challenge disciplinary boundaries. But I'm not always welcomed in some spaces. As an Arab who's working on Armenians, I'm always asked, what gives me the right, or the insinuation that what gives me the right to work on Armenians when I'm not Armenian or I'm not fully Armenian? Being quarter Armenian doesn't count in some circles. The world wants kind of purity. The binaries that we have to fit in one place or another. The conformity. Identities and disciplines require conformity, and conformity is always violent, whether it is imposed on us or we self-impose it on ourselves. The world wants us to belong to a single story, to a single narrative. We are either this or that. And if we are this, it means that these are our official friends, and these are our official enemies, and these causes we should care about, and these causes we shouldn't care about. Right? And this is where the work of the Palestinian American intellectual Edward Said became extremely important for me. He warned against blind affiliations. A line that I always quote in my writing is never solidarity before criticism. Never solidarity before criticism. When we are in solidarity with a group of people or a particular cause, we tend to blindly support it regardless of what they do. We are of this group, we shouldn't criticize our own group, right? We should only criticize the kind of barbarism in the histories of and the societies of others, but never in our own societies. And this is where, with the work of Benjamin, to recognize the barbarism within ourselves. To be critical while being in solidarity is to learn to ask questions. Is to learn to ask questions that implicate us. It is to ask questions about the groups and the power structures of which we are beneficiaries. It is so easy to commemorate violence that happened in other places, or to recognize genocides that happened in a different continent. It is always difficult to recognize and speak about the kind of evil that we are implicated with. And no one is completely pure. Now, Edward Said spoke about the intellectual exile, where exile and being uprooted is not in the negative, is not something that happens to us. Rather, exile is a choice, is a conscious choice to say no, to refuse to be complicit in the violence of the group we are nominally affiliated with. And that kind of exile requires from us not only a critical mind, but a compassionate heart. To be able to see ourselves, see compassion, it means to suffer with, to see ourselves in the stories of others, to see others as bearers of the same histories of violence, of pains. Those who are currently being deported, those who are currently dying on migration routes in different parts of the world are not different than us. They carry the same fragility and vulnerability. They have very similar hopes and fears about the future. They are just humans implicated by different power structures than our privileged ones. And this kind of compassion moves us away from identities. So when I spoke to you about my own identities, it is not to assert them or celebrate them. It is to transcend them. Identities are great as departure points. We have to start somewhere. But they are never destinations. They are bad destinations, in fact, because they confine us and limit our creativity and our moral capacity to feel the pains of others and to be able to be morally and be just in the world. To be able to be consistent, that if I'm going to criticize the conversion of Hagia Sophia as a Christian to a mosque, then I have to be equally against the conversion of the Cordoba Mosque into a church. And this is not to celebrate buildings and architecture. On the contrary, I'm using them as a symbol because these places, this is where a lot of people worshipped. This is where a lot of people lived and thrived. And therefore, when I was mourning these places, I wasn't mourning the past out of nostalgia. On the contrary, I was mourning what could have been if the Jews and the Muslims remained in the Iberian Peninsula, if the Armenians remained in Turkey, if the Americas were not invaded and colonized, how the world would have looked today, how my own region, the Middle East, that is implicated by so much violence, would have looked today. Right? So the idea here of being uprooted is a conscious choice that we all have to make, to say no to conformity. And in that uprootedness, we become really rooted, but not in places and identities, rather rooted in values, in criticism, in compassion. And to be able to handle criticism and compassion together, we need a little bit of something that we rarely hear today, a little bit of humility. And this allows us really to come down to the level of exclusivity, to see ourselves and the other as part of the same humanity. Thank you.